So welcome to First Tuesdays today. Thank you for joining us. I'm Jennifer Fenton from the Washington State Library. Before I introduce our guest presenter today, I'd like to run through a few things. Today, Carolyn Peterson is at a conference, so she's not able to join us. She is my co-moderator. For technical support today, we have Joe with us. So if you are having trouble hearing or seeing something, please go ahead and either send a message in chat, or you can call Joe or email him. So I'll leave that information up for just a moment. And Joe will probably be able to, he can type his phone number into our chat as well. And Jeremy's not able to be with us today. This program is brought to you by the Washington State Library, funded out of our Institute of Museum and Library Services. So I would ask that everyone please go ahead and type in chat where you are joining us from, what library, what city that library is in, so that we and state, because I suspect, looking at our great turnout today, that we have people from out of state. So that will give us an idea of who all is joining us. So thank you all for coming today. And I am going to introduce our presenter today. Cecilia McGowan is the coordinator of children's services for the King County Library System. She's been a children's librarian for 30 years, worked for 3 library systems, and been a frontline librarian, branch manager, and coordinator. She is active in the Association for Library Service to Children, which is a division of the American Library Association, where she has been a board member, priority group consultant, and chair of the Robert F. Siebert Informational Book Award. And on a personal note, Cecilia and I go way back to working many years ago together through the Washington Library Association on chaos. So I am really pleased that Cecilia is here today to share with you about when finding picture books really can be child's play. All right, Cecilia, take it away.
Great, thanks, Jennifer. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm so glad that you're able to listen in. So I just want to tell you from the get-go, this is not an exhaustive report. Rather, it's a big picture with some details. So it's how the King County Library System is providing better access to picture books for children and families. Now, as I have a lot of ground to cover, I would prefer that you hold your questions until the end, and that way we'll be sure to get through all the slides. Now, if we run out of time for all of your questions, my contact information will be there, and please feel free to contact me, and I can get you in contact with other people that were part of this effort. So the KCLS, the King County Library System, yeah, we're big. We're 48 libraries. We're urban. We're suburban. We're rural. We're huge, 2,100 square miles, 22 million checkouts. We have 9.9 million in library and 47.6 million online, and thousands upon thousands of picture books. So why this project? So our director visited the Darien Library a few years ago, probably 2.5, and came back and said, well, what do you think? Do you think we could do that here? So we read the articles, we talked to the other libraries that were trying this out, and especially the articles about doing away with Dewey. And many of us thought that this might work. We were intensely curious, but gosh, we're a pretty big system. So I have to show you this because it just makes me giggle every time I look at it. So look me in the eye and tell me you don't believe in Dewey anymore. Well, it's not that I don't believe in Dewey. I haven't lost my faith. It's just that when it comes to children and picture books, I think we can serve them better than alphabetizing by the author's last name. I mean, after all, the spines are so skinny how can you even read the author's name anyway? It's kind of by guess and by golly, waiting in there and getting the information, getting the books that you need in the hands of kids. Okay, so where do we begin, and how do we begin? So, like any big organization, we had to have a big meeting and a good old chinwag about whether we wanted to attempt this or not. Now, I'm going to be honest, there were detractors and there were supporters. It worked at a library that had one library. It worked at a library with 3 libraries and even up to 10 libraries. But 48 buildings? Well, we're talking about, oh gosh, upwards of 750,000 picture books, maybe even close to 1 million. How would that work? So, like any other big organization, we decided to work with a research group and find out what the public thought. Because we didn't see that so much in the articles that we read or the people that we talked to. We didn't see that they had gone to the public to ask them, so what is it you want when you come and visit the library with your children? So we engaged Hardwick Research. We've worked with them on a lot of projects, and they did a great job of getting the right kind of cross-section of our parents and developing the questions around these ideas after meeting with us. And at that time, we were considering, as the Darien Library had, intermingling picture books and easy nonfiction. And so we went to our patrons and we asked, how do you look for these things? How do you use it? What are the things you mostly look for? What kind of organization would help you? And how would they feel about mingling those picture books and those easy books? So we had 3 groups of 8 parents each in our focus groups. We chose patrons that were already regular library users because we wanted to have users that were already familiar with our building. Now, they didn't have to visit every week, but we did want them to be familiar with how the library works. And I don't know about your library systems, but our library patrons, even though we're so big, gosh, they go all over the place. So they have a good idea of how our different libraries work, from our very smallest libraries up to our biggest libraries. And I'd say one of the most interesting things about the focus groups, if you haven't participated in one, is sitting there and not having anything show on your face when they tell you the things that they want that you already have. It makes me want to just stand up and say, well, here's what we have. But we did. We kept ourselves in check. So the parents told us that what they really wanted was display books face out. They do want books organized by subject. They want us to label the shelves with words and pictures. And we want them, they want us to help them quickly find what they and their children want. So we dug in a little bit further, and these patrons were very savvy. They understood that there were drawbacks in arranging books like this also. If you were looking for a particular author, how would you do that? How would you put the nonfiction? How would you help the families do that? So, but they also, some of the other things that they wanted, my favorite was they wanted to enclose the children's section with gates so the children couldn't escape. That's one of my favorites. But these 4 things were the most that they wanted, but they talked about their experience of visiting the children's room, having 2 or 3 children running in different directions, asking for help to find favorite characters or pink books, and wanting to do all that in just a few minutes. And they wanted to encourage their children to find books on their own. So, how do we accomplish this? How do we put our arms around what they want and what we think we can provide? So we pulled a committee together of these stakeholders, and we thought it was important to get that cross-section because it did mean so many layers of processes that had to take place. It wasn't just putting a label on a book and putting it on the shelf. It's not just the access for the child and the parent, it is that access online. Because so many of our patrons reserve books online and then come to pick them up. Or when they're just looking in the catalog and they want to find it, we can't say, well, go look over there. We do need that experience that's with all of these people in the committee. So, this committee came up with what our first decisions would be on this project. How many categories would we have? What should those categories be? How should we label them? How will they be displayed in the catalog? So when you look at the catalog, what will you see? Will the staff and patrons be able to search for them in the catalog? How many libraries should we include in the pilot? How do we communicate this to staff and patrons? And how will we find out if it's a success? Now, let me just say that when you get a bunch of knowledgeable, opinionated people in the room, things get really exciting. But that's exactly what we wanted. We wanted passionate staff members who wanted to help children and families find the books that they wanted. Well, and what made this even more exciting for us was that staff members on this committee didn't even speak the same language in trying to figure out how to do it. The catalogers, the children's librarians, the selectors, circulation, we had to come up with ways to communicate with each other where we really knew what the other was saying. When the catalogers start talking about it's in this field, we would just be totally at sea. We did a lot of, here's my understanding of what you just said. Is that correct? Well, and many times it wasn't, so we had to work through it so we did understand each other and get it right. Because ultimately, the public had to be able to understand it, our staff had to be able to understand it, and to be able to use it in a seamless way so that they didn't see any of this that had gone on in the background. So, the subject that families most said they were looking for, cars and trucks, pink books. By pink books, families were thinking, ballet, books that really were pink on the cover and glittery. Pink is exactly the word that they used. Feelings, concepts, popular characters like Dora the Explorer, life issues, science and nature, and stories good for babies and toddlers. So how do we get those all together? So we didn't want to fracture the collection too much, but we did want parents to find what they needed. We looked at what other libraries had selected, and then we came up with, okay, I know that says 13 categories. Wait, next slide. There's really 14 categories. You know, me and math, and even typing math, I'm not so good at. It's 14 categories. And so what should they be? So these are the categories that we decided we could fit the majority of the collection into that would be of the most use to our patrons and to our staff that were helping patrons find books. And stories happened to be the category that we thought was going to be one of the biggest because it was stories that didn't fit into a particular genre or category. So, how do we go about categorizing the books? We pulled the children's selectors, the two children's selectors and myself, and children's librarians, and together we came up with a hierarchy. What trumps what? Essentially, what is this book about mostly? Because we know that books could have more than one genre within it. We got together in a big room and we went through the list title by title. This was great training. It got us all mostly on the same page about how to categorize, but it took all day and we didn't get them all done. And later on I'll talk about how many titles we did for that first library. In subsequent meetings and get-togethers, we all had our own computer and an online cart, and we worked our way through on our own. But we also, because we were all in the same room, had the opportunity to call out, well, here's what this book says it's about. Do you think that's issues or do you think that's feelings? For the first library that we categorized, which was one of our smaller libraries, it meant choosing the category for 2,105 titles. And that's the library that opened this past September 2013. For the second library that we categorized, which was a larger library, we categorized 4,879 titles. It's a whole lot more. That took some time. And that library will open later this year. And I'll talk about those two libraries in a moment. The decision was made earlier this year that when the selectors placed their new orders or were reordering titles, we would put the category on all of those new titles. Even though they were only going out to a couple of libraries with labels, we would still have the category on all new titles going forward. And at that point, the only difference that the public would see from what was on the shelf, excuse me, was an entry in the full record. And I'll talk about that more in just a moment. So how should they be labeled? How can we make it clear or easy for the public and staff to find these books? What kind of label should they have? So we came up with an oval label and several sizes, and everybody seemed to like it. It wasn't too big. We had our graphics department mock up different sizes. We wanted it to cross over onto the front of the book and a little bit on the spine, so when it was on the shelf, you could see the color, but it didn't obscure the label for the author's last name, and it, when you pulled it out, you could see the label on the front. Now, you would think that choosing 14 colors wouldn't be so difficult. Well, let me tell you, it is. We had that big old Pantone pack of colors, but we had to be careful that the colors weren't too light, that they weren't too dark, because we did want the print to show up. We chose black print on the label, and they can't be too close together in shade. And our graphics department printed up a close approximation of the colors for us to look over and say, yeah, that looks pretty good. That's in the kind of in the same color, but it's far enough away that it'll be okay. So here's how the books that we have categorized, and we've put the collection name in for our first library that went live last September, which is the Federal Way 320th Library. The title is Five Trucks, and you can see that at the Federal Way 320th Library, the collection is picture books - things that go. The call number is exactly the same as any other book. But when the staff at that library, if someone says, I'm really interested in this particular title, they can go directly to the Things That Go part of that collection and pull it off. But then behind the scenes, what does the full record look like? Catalogers were able, and now as we go forward, are able to insert the collection name into that genre field, and that's field 655. I don't know that. I asked one of my cataloger friends that helped do this, and I know there are some out there that are writing this down right now. So patrons and staff can search this collection to find more books in this category, a boon for everybody. Even if your library hasn't been categorized yet, you can search under this and you can pull up a list of books that are in this category that have been tagged. So going forward, all the titles, excuse me, let me back up. All the copies of this book have that same genre category. So that even if I'm at the Bellevue Library, this book has that category. It doesn't show it on the shelf because we haven't categorized that book, but we could go to the shelf. In other words, we could go here to Bellevue, it's not showing there, but Auburn, and say, okay, it's in the picture books, and it's under FLOCA, but this is a new book. Oh, I bet it has that new Things That Go label too. So it is a way to search the collection so that you can place holds for people, and then they could go out and search for it too. They see that that label, oh, Things That Go, that has that label, and my child really likes those books. So even before we categorize a full library, it's being used in our libraries. So we chose 2 libraries to be the pilot. We took the opportunity to choose a small library and a large library. Federal Way 320 is small and the Fairwood Library is large, and they were going to be remodeled. So it gave us an opportunity to not only use the collection but to and arrange it in a different way, but to set up a shelving way that made it much more approachable and usable with some display out for the public. And for ease of testing, we also purchased opening day collections because their collections had gone into storage. There was no way we were going to pull those out of storage and label those. So we bought an opening day collection, and that is what we categorized for the first library, the 320th library. It was our real test library for the shelving and for the categorization, and that is the library that we used to decide, do we have the right categories? How's the shelving? Do the signs need to be different? Fairwood won't open till later this year, but 320th opened last September. So how do we communicate this to our staff? We wrote articles. We want everyone in the libraries, in our 48 libraries, to be excited about this. And since our patrons do travel from library to library, we want to make sure that they know what's going on when they come to one library and it has labels on it and another library does not. So we kept the staff informed. We made presentations at the children's meeting, and our collection liaisons are the point people in our clusters that push out information about the collection. So we included them also. So here's what our initial shelf guide looked like. We had this up at the beginning of the picture book collection and at the end of the picture book collection. And it alphabetically arranges our picture book categories with a small description of what is included in that category. We also had a double-sided bookmarks that we gave patrons to had on display and that match the colors of the labels. So the bookmarks, I have a copy of the bookmarks, a later bookmark that's an updated version. And we also, for our shelves, I'll have a photo of the shelves a little later on, we created magnetic shelf signs. We are updating these, and the oval image will be pushed to the right going forward, because we found that it makes it easier to read when it's over shelves of books that are full or partially full. The shelving is metallic, so it works really well for these to be just stuck on there. It also gives us an opportunity to move the shelving around if we find that, oh my gosh, this category got really big, so we need to shift it over here. And you'll see in the photo later on that we do share a couple of bins with two of the categories. So, is it a success? We want to check in with the public. We haven't started the Fairwood project. We're going to move forward on Fairwood, but we wanted to find out what does the public really think about it. So we asked Hardwick Research to come in again, and she did intercept interviews in the Federal Way through 20th Library. She had a list of questions. She was at the library before and after story times. She sat in the children's area and just asked people questions and observed how they were using the collection. So yes, we think it was a success, and so does the public. They liked the new shelving. They thought that the bins were a great chance for kids to flip through a bunch of books, and the bins are only a display area to show a representation of what is available in that category. It'll create an interest looking through those. That face out really does catch children and adults' attention. The child height encourages children to look for themselves, and the patrons agree. The new subject groupings made it easier to find books. They like that their children can find books by themselves, especially for younger children, because they're interested in specific topics. And they did recognize that although it made it harder to find a specific book or author, the majority of parents and child care providers are not looking for books in that way. Our teachers are, but the vast majority of our patrons aren't looking for books by author. And in 4 months, the circulation year over year increased 56%. Now, some of that, of course, can be attributed to brand new library. However, not that much could be attributed to that. So we have this library. Now's the time, before we move forward to the Fairwood Library, what changes do we want to make? So over the months that the library was open, the children's librarians that work at that library pulled out titles that they thought, oh, that's just not in the right category. So they pulled those out. They pulled out hundreds of titles that they felt could go in a different category, much more effectively, or much more represented what the book was about. We tried to pull more titles out of stories because it was way too big. So the children's librarians at that library pulled out titles that they thought needed to be categorized, and then we also, as a group, sat down and worked title by title through the stories section and said, yeah, let's make a different category for this. So what that meant was that those titles then had to have their category name change in the full record, and they also had to be relabeled. At that time, we also decided we would expand and clarify some of the categories. We wanted to get this all done before we placed the opening day collection order for the Fairwood Library, so that everything that was ordered for that library would have the new correct category and label on it. So we had received some feedback from staff members that we should change the name of Other Lands to Our World, and we agreed. We thought that was a great idea. So we changed the name of that collection. We expanded it a little more. Before, in Other Lands, the stories took place only outside the United States, but Our World encompasses all cultures within the United States and outside the United States. And it made it a much larger collection, too, which we found to be much more useful. We also changed the pink sparkly label from pink to silver because we had feedback from staff members that said that they felt that it was too, it was categorizing those books as being just for girls. And that wasn't the case. The books also had royalty, knights. So we said, yeah, that makes sense. Let's do that. So we went through a couple of searching for labels that would maybe encompass that until we finally came up with a terrific, sparkly silver label. And so we have knights, we have royalty, and it's terrific. And it is quite eye-catching. So here are our new shelf guides. It's probably hard to see that we have expanded some of the categories. We've changed Other Lands to Our World, and we've created that sparkly label. And then here are our bookmarks. These are up at the Federal Way 320th Library. We have these so that anyone can order these from our graphics department. So here's a photo of, at the 320th Library, of the bins and a display of Bedtime and Concepts. Bedtime is on the top left. You can see the magnetic sign, and same for Concepts. And down below, the bins that represent those two collections. And then here's a shot of Science and Nature, a little farther away. You can see that in this photo to the right that the majority of the books are still in order on the shelf, but it's much lower shelves, and each of those titles has a label on them so that kids know, parents know, child care providers know those books are within that same category. We found that the bins empty out very quickly, so they have to be refilled pretty frequently. One of the interesting things that came out of the Intercept interviews was Nancy told us that some of the people she talked to didn't even realize that the books were categorized. They just knew that they found a place in the collection that had all the books that they wanted or their child noted. So it was it wasn't obvious to them, yet they found the areas that they and their child most wanted to use, and they went back to those areas. So, moving forward, the two libraries, Federal Way 320th and Fairwood, they are our only two libraries who will have the opening day collections so that we could tweak them. The two next libraries that we have selected have already been mapped to titles already categorized, and we have had meetings to categorize those. So let me explain that a little bit. So we used the 320th library after we categorized those, and then we matched it up with the Fairwood collection. And the titles that were unique to the new Fairwood collection, we categorized those. So now we have an even bigger pot of books that have been categorized in the system. So one of our next libraries going forward is the Bothell Library, which is really big. And so the collection of 320th and Fairwood were matched and mapped to the Bothell collection, and the titles that were unique to that library, and I want to point out, maybe not unique to the system, because other libraries could have those titles, but unique in regards to 320th and Fairwood, and we categorize those also. So a decision was made just a couple of months ago that we would categorize and label all 48 of our libraries over the span of the next 4 years. Because we think that the shelving is an integral part of how this collection is used by children and families, most of the libraries will wait to reshelve their books in the category sections after they get the new shelving. But some of our libraries are so excited by this new arrangement that they want to go ahead and they want to label the books and rearrange them just as soon as they have all of the labels on. All of the books stay in alphabetical order by author until we know the entire collection has been labeled, and the library wants us to make the change in the record to show that the collection is on the shelf by category name rather than author's last name. And since June, all new titles and all reordered titles are arriving at libraries already with a label attached. Our vendor, Baker & Taylor, has all of our labels. We order those from a vendor and we send them to Baker & Taylor, and the labels are applied directly on the books as they're being processed and before they're sent out to our libraries. But that still means that thousands of books will still need to be labeled before putting them into the new arrangement. So libraries are using volunteers, they're using page staff to complete this. And for our smaller collections, it won't take as much time as some of our larger libraries. But as we go to more and more libraries, more and more of the collection will be categorized in the computer. At that point, they will just need to be relabeled. We think it's a tremendous step forward in serving the public and especially children who can find looking for a book pretty hard, especially on their own. And we're not taking away the element of browsing, that element of surprise, where we know children go and pull books off the shelf willy-nilly. I mean, that's part of finding good books. But we do think that this is a great way to serve our families. So now I'm ready. That was a quick run-through. Ready to take questions or comments? So you can chat those in. So the shelving was critical. How did we choose it? We actually had it designed. Dree Ralph, who is our coordinator for new building, and she's part of facilities, worked with a vendor to create the shelving so that it was functional and safe and held the number of books that we needed. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention too. It flitted by my brain. So we have 14 categories, and so in the majority of our libraries, we will have 14 separate bins, like I showed you, those two different separated bins for each section. Now, we know that's not going to work for some of our small libraries, or really small libraries, so we're going to have to come up with a way to shelve and display that collection. So, yeah, we worked with with our vendor to do that. I don't know the name of our vendor who did the shelving. If you email me, I'll put you in contact with Dree Ralph, and she'll be able to tell you. What's actually printed on the spine label, just the category, but we also have the author's last name. So it's going to be, for that book that I showed you, E. Floca, and then on the label itself, it'll say things that go. Oh, no, not every book fell within our categories. Oh, my goodness, no. And so that's why stories is fairly large. But interestingly, the biggest section is famous friends, which has well-known characters. So that's where Dora goes, and Caillou. So, yeah, that's one of our big sections. Within categories, do you shelve by author? Yes, we do. We absolutely do that, because we do want patrons who are looking for a specific author to be able to find that author within that collection. How did the circulation staff feel about the change? You know, we worked at the very beginning with the circulation, the overall manager of circulation, to make this as easy for the circulation staff as possible. And so when that switch is flipped, that puts the books into their categories, the holds list, when it is printed in categories. So let's say animals is the first category, so when the holds list is printed, it'll be animals, and then it'll be arranged by author's last name. So it will be in order. Until that switch is flipped, the books will stay in order by author. And I think because the circulation, all of the staffs of these libraries, especially Federal Way 320, because they were our first library, we included them in how this was going to work, how they would be displayed, excuse me, and tried to make it as easy as possible for them. And I think the most important thing about the way that we communicated this was, here's the great benefit to the public, and why it's important for us to provide an access that is so much easier for children to discover the books they're really interested in, and to find categories that they didn't know they were interested in, and to check those books out also. Once they knew what that background was, that we were doing this to help the patron, they've been fine. I haven't heard any complaints about the arrangement or pulling holds. Right, they're still organized by author's last name. Yes, any thoughts on including bilingual Spanish books and themes? We have the books, and so I'm not sure exactly what you're asking here. Our world language collections that are in a majority, let's use Spanish, are on the shelf under author's last name in a section that is labeled in Espanol. Books that are bilingual that we have within the picture book collection, depending on where the story takes place, it could be in our world to show our diverse country and world, or it could be in one of the other categories that most represents what that book is about. We don't want to put the book just in our world if it is, how do I say this? Just because it's a bilingual book doesn't necessarily mean that it is a book that celebrates that particular culture. We know that parents are looking for books mostly for subject as our kids, but we do include those in our world and the other sections, and we have a separate world language collection. I'm not sure I completely answered that question, but if I didn't, email back in, text back in. Good question. We decided not to include nonfiction. So, and the main reason we decided not to include nonfiction is that just doing picture books took up a much bigger footprint than a normal picture book collection does. So including our easy nonfiction collection, there wasn't a way that our buildings could hold that adequately. So we decided that instead we would only do the picture books. In our pilot library, Federal Way 320th, we did create some wayfinding magnets that fit on those shelves that have subject headings like space and transportation and cooking with a picture, and we have those on those shelves. But we have to have the right shelving before we can do that in the easy nonfiction, because we know, and the parents told us, that easy nonfiction is just as frustrating, if sometimes not more frustrating, than finding picture books. So those guides do lead them to those sections. And my understanding is that when we get the new shelving for other libraries, we'll be moving forward on that also. Oh, great. I'm glad that answered your question. So, any other questions? Books that are bilingual or mixed in with themes. It really depends on, for the bilingual books, it really depends on whether our selectors who select our world language collections see that as a book that would go in the picture book collection or in the world language collection. Sometimes we have duplicate copies. In world language, no, we won't be dividing those, I don't think, into themes because our collections aren't that large. At least not at this time are we thinking about doing that. It's a great idea, though. It's something we'll bring forward because at the minimum we could put the labels on them because we have separated these out in a different shelving configuration for the picture books. I'm not sure how that would work for the world language collection, but that's a great idea. I'll bring that up with my group. Okay, just a minute. Yes, it absolutely was faster. Debate about staff. Oh my gosh, yeah. There was huge debate about where the book should go because, you know, we have varying levels of experience. and experiences with the public and our own feelings about it, but we always came to an agreement about where that book should go. And that's the great thing about categorizing in a group, is we could sit at our computer and I'd say, oh, let me read you this book. Now, I'm a coordinator. I don't work with the public directly anymore, but so I totally rely on the children's librarians, and so they use their experience with the public and their vast knowledge of books and working with families to say, you know, I think this goes here. Some of them were, you would just look at it. You hardly even needed to read the description to say, oh yeah, that goes in animals, or oh yeah, that goes in concepts. But the question was, okay, it's a book about animals and it also has colors in it. What's the dominant feature of this book? That's more the kinds of conversations we would have. We tried not to get too twisted up by getting it down to, as it were, the last decimal point on this. Because it's a browsing collection, and we know that kids are browsing through looking for a book, we're just trying to get it in that area that we think they might be looking. We can't be second-guessing ourselves too much, because we would be there for weeks. As it was, we were there for days. And we always had food, and it was a wonderful collegial atmosphere. But yeah, we definitely had conversations. You're most welcome. I'm glad you're able to help me. Do you have a copy of the hierarchy? Yes, I do, and I'll send it to you. And the hierarchy is for the entire system. And we went back through and we redid the hierarchy after we recategorized, before we recategorized a bunch of books going forward for the Fairwood Library collection. So email me and I'll send it to you. Oh, the process. Good question. Yeah, I meant to put that in there. So for our system, 48 libraries, we're moving at lightning speed, I think. So our director came maybe early, mid-2012. We got together and started meeting. What would this, it met a lot, communicated a lot, came up with plans. And because we knew that Federal Way through 20th was going to be redone, we started ordering the books. So we had come up with all the categories, we come up with the labels, and they started being categorized by the selection staff early last year, 2013, and the library opened in 2013. So that is amazingly fast for us. So we're hoping to do about 10 or 12 libraries going forward a year, and that's more to keep up with the pace of the shelving than it is, and of course, for some of those big collections, it's going to take a lot of time to affix those labels. Now, of course, one of the most important parts of this is that the staff, the children's librarians, need to do a great job of weeding, as they do already. But when you're looking at a book that needs to be labeled or not, is this book really worth relabeling? It really comes down to that. So, yeah, we're hoping to be done in 4 years. So I don't know if you have my email address. I'm going to put my email address in here. And be sure to email me if there's anything I can send you, more photos, samples of the labels, any of that stuff. We're happy to share that. Now, I want you to keep in mind that it's still summer reading, summer learning, so things can get bogged down. I can also get you in contact with cataloging staff, selection staff, our Dree Ralph, who did the shelving. We want to share what we learned, and we'd love to hear your ideas if you decide to do the same sort of arrangement at your library. You're welcome, Rebecca. I'm so pleased to see so many people from all over the country.
Thank you so much. That was really great. And yes, this session has been archived and will be posted on our Washington State Library First Tuesdays webpage. So thanks, Cecilia. We appreciate you taking the time to share this with all of us.
You're very welcome. I'm passionate about it. I think it's absolutely fabulous. I think the public loves it. I think that we definitely had staff members who felt we were dumbing down the collection. But people have come around and see what a great idea and what a great access it provides to the picture book collection for children and families. But we won't be putting up the gates, just so you know. We won't be putting up those gates to him and those babies like those parents wanted.